SMR. So it's the small. What does that stand for again?
Small modular reactor.
Small modular reactor. So basically, companies are looking to basically be self-sufficient in nuclear energy over relying on the grid to power their
Yeah.
AI data.
Yeah.
Basically,
Well, so first of all, they tried to buy a chunk of guaranteed nuclear power from a big station that's connected to the grid. But the government said, no, you can't do that because it destabilizes the grid. So now they are forced to go off the grid with these SMRs instead.
right? And it's actually being really efficient, isn't it? Or
I
is it
would
not
say it's
yet?
very inefficient. It's actually very
Right.
inefficient.
Okay.
SMRs are probably going to be very inefficient. But the point is, you can be inefficient or you can rely on the grid. And the government said that they cannot guarantee for themselves a chunk of the nuclear power plant's output.
Right.
Basically, because without that chunk of the nuclear power plant's output, the rest of the grid would be robbed of that amount, right?
The choice is inefficiency over relying on the grid. You'll take inefficiency every time.
Yeah.
It's quite funny. Right, we're back on the topic of nuclear today, Nick. Uh, One of the big things you discuss is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission's rejection of Amazon's nuclear power purchase might actually accelerate the adoption of something called SMRs. What are they called again? I've got a complete mind blank. Small modular reactors. That's what it is. How does this regulatory pushback reshape the relationship between tech companies and nuclear power? Is that
Yeah,
a big
it's
question to start the day with?
yeah, yeah. If I hadn't written an article about this quite recently, would have been a tough
Well,
one
there you
to
go.
figure out. So there was this big story about how AI data centers need so much electricity that the only way to sort of meet this demand is with nuclear power because it has to be clean, has to be green, has to be reliable, stable, blah 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 blah. So all these AI data center companies, Amazon, Meta, and whoever else, Google, they decided that they would buy a chunk of nuclear power plants output off the meter or before the meter, separately, sort of guaranteeing themselves a share of a local nuclear power plant's output. And they would tend to build their data center near a nuclear power plant for this reason. Well, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in the US, which is a political body really, voted that Amazon in this case, which specifically purchased this data center, I think because it was near a nuclear power plant, cannot purchase an additional 0.5 gigawatts electricity from the local nuclear power plant before the meter, so guaranteeing it for themselves. They can't do it. Why? Because it destabilizes the grid, right? The rest of the grid, the electricity grid that you and I and all these Americans locally use, it needs that 0.5 gigawatt of electricity from the local nuclear power plant because renewables are intermittent. And this, I think, has radically shifted the relationship between nuclear power and the AI data centers by channeling what used to be a large-scale nuclear power story. Nuclear power is back because AI data centers need them into the small modular reactors sector only. Because if you're Meta or Facebook is Meta, or Google or Amazon, you now know that you cannot guarantee for your data centers a share of nuclear power's output. Right? Politicians are not going to allow data centers to keep their lights on while the grid's failing around it. Right? So if they want to secure nuclear power for their data centers, they're going to have to do it in an off-the-grid sort of way. And small modular reactors are the way that they can do that. And one of the interesting things about this is that it's become very fashionable at the moment to criticize small modular reactors because in many, many, many different ways, they're less efficient than large-scale nuclear. Any large-scale factory is going to be more efficient. Same for electricity. And my point is that they may be significantly less efficient, but they are independent of a failing electricity grid because of this whole energy transition thing. And that independence from the electricity grid that they offer is what's going to make them so much more successful over the next few years, especially because of the demand AI data centers create. And if I'm right, if the grid's failing and the local data center is still running because it's got its SMR, what do you think that's going to do to the rest of the community? If Amazon and Google and Meta knew the local grid is not going to function well enough to power their data centers, why didn't the people running the electricity grid know that that's the case, right? Why didn't they know that it was going to fail their communities and so on and so
Mm.
forth? So I think there's going to be a sort of a split between the parts of the world and the companies of the world that are willing to rely on the electricity grid. And I think they'll go the way of Germany over the last few years. And I think SMRs offer the only way out, the only escape route out of that, especially for the high energy demand industries.
So how might so it's kind of like an energy apartheid sort of looming, right? How might that uh, the split between SMR powered facilities and grid dependent communities affect the economy or the financial markets going forward?
Yeah, I remember watching a Deutsche Welle TV documentary. I think it was a brief documentary, and it was about all these small business owners, which Germany is famous for, buying diesel generators because they basically decided they can't rely on the local electricity grid anymore. So they had people like vets. You know, a vet can't have the lights go off in the middle of surgery. So they all these small business people had been buying these diesel generators because they knew and understood the risks of the energy transition and the energy crisis happened and all this sort of thing. So I think that's going to happen just at a bigger scale, right? And it's going to divide communities, states within the US, states within Australia, into places that foresaw and were willing to spend money to secure electricity, versus those places that were willing to buy into the whole electricity energy revolution of green tech. And I feel like, although it's expensive and inefficient, the results are going to speak for themselves, right? There's going to be an energy crisis, and some people will have sufficient electricity and some won't. And we see this in places where the electricity grids fell for reasons other than the green energy push, right? The wealthy people, like you mentioned, apartheid, those wealthy compounds in South Africa have electricity while the grid fails around it. So it's going to be a lot like that. It's going to be fascinating to watch because these trends and these infrastructure projects, they don't change quickly, right? So we're down the garden path. We can't sort of just say, oh, the whole renewables thing was a mistake, let's turn around and go back. We're too far gone, right? So the what's the phrase about the cakes in the oven? Like it's too late. So whatever happens now, there's going to be this energy shortages and this division, even if we wake up. So I think the opportunities to capture the market moves that happen as a result are baked in.
You do actually mention some quite significant gains in nuclear related investments at Strategic Intelligence Australia, which is the newsletter that you run locally in Australia, and it's Jim Rickards' wider newsletter, which is published from the States. But and you've made some significant. So you're one of the gains you're sitting on is 663%, and the other is 364% gains so far. Given that shift from large scale nuclear to SMRs, are you adjusting your investment strategy in the sector as a result now?
So those two are both SMR companies, and funnily enough,
Right.
the investment that was broader nuclear, it soared and it's come almost back down to our entry point. I think it was up about 80% at one point.
Yeah.
So that was a uranium play.
Yeah.
So maybe that's the giveaway here. Is the uranium has returned, back to where it was. I can't remember how many months or more than a year ago now. Whereas SMR stocks are taking off, which is really the point of my article today.
Yeah.
Is that people, and as you suggest, investors should be adjusting their play into the SMR sector, which has only just become more and more investable in the last few months. And those stocks are moving. And I think it hasn't, the point we made earlier in the video of this federal energy regulatory authorities or commissions announcement
They just
to
love a
rejection.
regulatory commission.
Yeah, so I call them the FERCs because it's the FERC. Anyway, this decision has it's not been appreciated yet what it means for small modular reactors versus large scale nuclear. Because if you think about it, the companies that build large scale nuclear power plants, I'm sure they'll do well because nuclear is the best possible solution to a failing electricity grid as we have now, and that's happening in Australia right now. That shift and that realization. But they're still part of a failing electricity grid, right? So if you've got a nuclear power and you're selling electricity, and half the time the price is negative because you've got so much solar panels and producing so much solar power, and and the other half of the time it's crazy expensive. A nuclear power plant doesn't really do so well financially and economically in that scenario. And they're not as well designed to produce more and less electricity across the day as, say, a gas generating power plant is. Because nuclear power's fuel is a very small part of its cost base, the key part of the cost is the financing, the regulatory side. So nuclear power is efficient if it's producing all the time as much as its capacity allows, and that's not well paired with a renewable energy grid. So the point being that I don't think traditional large-scale nuclear power plants are where investors should be going. I totally believe in them as a solution to
Yeah.
the electricity problem, but investors should be focusing on SMRs. That's where the bigger opportunity is in terms of our investment
So
dollars.
when did you? How long have you been in them? Just so that people know.
One of them is about 2 years, I think.
Right.
And one of them is just perhaps earlier this year.
So
Yeah.
they're significant moves.
Mm.
Is I mean, how have they run up too far? Are they still pretty good value?
I think one of them is not. But there's plenty of other plays out there, and more of them are becoming available. The sector right now, I mean, there's I think one SMR that's operational in China.
Yep.
But the point is, the company that's gone up, I think it was 350 something percent. It doesn't actually have any significant sales or contracts or deals done yet. Some SMR companies have.
That's what I mean. So are they
Yeah,
revenue
so I
producing
think
yet?
it's still
Yeah.
such early days, and trying to figure out who is going to win the SMR race
Yeah.
is almost impossible, right?
Yeah.
I don't understand technology enough. I don't understand, how these deals go. I suspect it's going to be some private company, and it's not even going to be publicly listed that comes to, or perhaps people should be playing nuclear fuel. That is the type of fuel that is going to be used in these reactors. In these SMR reactors specifically. So there's lots of different ways to play it. But my point is that all investors should have an exposure specifically to this sector. Perhaps they should be picking the stock that hasn't gone up 300 whatever percent it is yet, rather than one that has. They should be picking. There's lots of different risk options out there. There's some companies that have lots of contracts already. There's ones that are just starting out. There's ones that are just listed. There's ones that are backed by billionaires and all this sort of thing. So there's lots of different options out there. And I think you'd have to play this for the long run, because right now this sector is bubbling. But like I said earlier, I
Yeah.
don't think the FERC's intervention and rejection of the connection between AI data centers and large-scale nuclear has been fully understood in terms of implications for the SMR sector on the
But
back of that. So I think
that's where an advantage for investors comes in, because when things aren't fully understood, that's when you could. But by the way, I just want to make clear for those watching, the reason why we're not being specifically naming the picks is because obviously you have to pay a subscription to Strategic Intelligence, and it's unfair to our valued subscribers to just give away the picks in an open forum like this. So I will just stipulate that if you're wondering why. But I don't know. You let us know what you think, guys. If you're watching, if you'd like a report, some kind of, we could maybe do a free report on the available SMRs in related investments in Australia. That might be a valuable report to do for readers. Nick, you draw an interesting connection between AI's power demands and the failure of green energy, the failure of the green energy transition and renewals to meet those demands. Do you think this could lead to a broader reassessment in time of renewable energy policies, particularly in countries like that are inherently resistant to nuclear power, like Australia?
yeah, I was wondering
I
if
know
you'd
you said
mentioned
that's
your
sort
next.
of there's the winds of change coming through, but I don't know. I don't know if it's there yet. But
Yeah, and it would be ironic if they go for the large scale nuclear, which is uniquely not suited to renewable energy and all this sort of thing. But I think that transition is very much underway, has already happened in the US, is underway in Europe right now, will fully occur in elections in Europe and then followed by Australia. That's all happening. That's all playing out right now. Obviously, the energy sector, especially nuclear, is very slow to get going in terms of the construction and building, but the moves in financial markets should precede that by a very long shot, right? So investors would have to make their move now. If the Germans especially change their mind about nuclear, that could add a lot of uranium demand pretty quickly, a bit like the Japanese recently. So all of this could happen quite quickly in financial markets, and hopefully that means we actually end up with a sensible grid over time. But what's really changed here, Woody, is that the electricity systems of the world in industrialized countries were preparing for electricity demand sort of flatline or trend down, as it has been for many years. And there's a reason for that, many reasons for that, including sort of the deindustrialization as industry got shipped off to China, sort of thing. And then AI comes along and creates enough energy demand that actually the projections have radically changed. And nothing is ready for that. The electricity grid is not ready for that. Funding these electricity creation projects are not ready for that. The renewable energy transition is not ready for that. Energy storage is not ready for that. Nothing's ready for that, right? And so that the combination of actually electricity demand now growing instead of falling, plus the attempted transition to intermittent energy, is just a combination that will force the issue towards nuclear. And as we've discussed in videos in the past, it really doesn't make sense to pair nuclear with renewables. So something's got to give. And it seems to be renewables projects that are going to give. What mystifies me is what happens, in the 20 years it would take to actually roll out significant amounts of nuclear power. Are we going to have energy shortages? How bad is an energy crisis going to get? How easily can politicians just pretend that emissions are suddenly no longer an issue after so many years of claiming the opposite, right? I mean, maybe I'm just naive, but I just can't imagine them all just saying, "Oh, sorry, we're wrong. Don't worry about it anymore. We're fine. We can just stick with gas for 20 years until the nuclear system's ready."
And just one final question, I guess. Do you think any of it changes with the new administration in the US coming in?
Yeah, that's already happening, and that's played out at COP recently in Baku in Azerbaijan. Commitments to, I think, triple nuclear power. They're getting more and more countries signing on to that commitment. But like I said, I think we're too far gone in so many different countries, especially Europe, to some extent the US, that we're going to get a crisis nevertheless, which is going to be fascinating, because the people that are promoting a transition to nuclear or to more sustainable forms of power, sustainable in the sense that they actually provide the supply we need.
Kind of handy.
Yeah, that's useful. Should have been a priority, but it wasn't. Those people are going to cop the consequences of so many years of attempting to transition to green energy or intermittent energy and electricity system that's just not ready for that.
Yeah. Well, good stuff, Nick. If you find this conversation interesting, check out Nick's article. The link to the description is in the description below, and let us know again on the report. Would you like an SMR report? I think that's kind of an interesting way to go. Just had an idea there while you were talking, Nick. Might be quite valuable for readers. Until when are you back in Australia or Japan? Sorry, you're in Barcelona. I thought you're on holiday, but you're actually not. You're doing a sort of a whirlwind thing, a bit with helping your mum, and then you went to London to take part of another conference over there. But you're back in Barcelona now. When are you home?
Yeah, I landed about an hour ago. I'm in Japan on the 20th of November and Australia the 20th of December.
And then maybe we can have one of these chats in person.
I'm not going anywhere ever again.
Yeah. Good move. All right, mate. I'll leave you to it, and thank you very much, and speak to you next week.
Great.
Thanks for tuning in to Fat Tail Daily. If you're ready to take a new approach to building wealth, avoiding the same old mainstream ideas and investigating new market trends, then make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on post notifications so you don't miss a single video. And as a thank you, we've got a free report just for you. It is packed with actionable insights that show you how to capitalize on an alternative investment idea that you'll unlikely find anywhere else. You can download it right now by clicking on the link in the description below. So, if you're ready to discover strategies that the traditional market just doesn't offer, grab your free report. Until next time.